Deep within the cool, shadowed halls of the fortress, where the stone walls hold the scent of centuries, there are those who move in silence. They are the watchers, the invisible guardians of the castle's lifeblood. Their footsteps leave no trace. Their voices are but a low murmur in the dark. They don't just guard the food, they guard the rhythm of survival itself. Tonight, we join these silent figures in their endless rounds as we uncover the final secrets of the castle's hidden larders and find peace in the quiet order that has endured for 1,000 years. If you are listening at night, tell me where you are and what time it is. Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories, where we share slow and gentle stories from history. These stories are made to calm your mind and help you fall asleep. Within the storage rooms, figures move quietly between rows and stacks, their presence woven into the structure of the space without drawing attention. They follow the narrow paths left open between barrels and sacks, stepping with care so as not to disturb what has been placed. Their clothing is simple and practical, shaped for movement rather than display, blending into the dim surroundings. Hands remain free or carry small tools used for counting or marking, held with familiarity rather than focus. These individuals are not separate from the environment, but move through it as part of its ongoing rhythm. To remain near them is to notice how their presence affects the atmosphere in subtle ways. The sound of their steps is soft, shaped by the careful way they place their feet on stone. There is a faint shift in the air as they pass, a slight disturbance that settles quickly behind them. The quiet movement of fabric, the gentle contact of hand against surface, and the low murmur of breath all contribute to a sensory pattern that feels integrated into the space. Nothing they do calls for attention, yet their presence is felt through these small, continuous impressions. Their actions unfold through a series of repeated gestures that form a steady routine over time. A hand reaches out to touch the side of a barrel, not to move it, but to confirm its place. A sack is pressed lightly, its firmness checked through contact rather than sight. Small marks may be made or noted, though they are not emphasized, serving only as quiet records of what has been observed. These actions are carried out without urgency, each one following the next in a sequence that feels practiced and unbroken. For those who take on this role, there is an awareness that grows through constant presence rather than deliberate focus. The state of the room becomes something understood through familiarity, where even slight differences are noticed without needing to be searched for. This awareness does not rely on memory alone, but on a continuous connection with the space and its contents. In this way, the watchers become part of the system they observe, maintaining order not through control, but through quiet attention. Along the length of the storage rooms, their movement follows familiar routes that have formed through repeated passage rather than formal design. These paths curve slightly around stacks and narrow between rows, shaped by where space allows easy movement. At certain points, they pause near specific groupings, places where items tend to gather in greater number or require closer attention. The routes are not marked, yet they are known through use, forming a quiet network that connects one section of the room to another. Each watcher moves within this pattern, guided by an understanding that has developed over time. To walk within these paths alongside them is to sense how their presence interacts with the space in subtle ways. The air shifts gently as they pass, carrying a faint trace of movement that lingers briefly before settling again. The sound of their steps follows a quiet rhythm, sometimes soft against smoother stone, sometimes slightly more defined where the surface changes. There is a closeness in the atmosphere when they stop near a stack, as if the space gathers around the moment of attention. These sensory details create a quiet awareness of their role without drawing focus away from the room itself. As they move, their actions take on a slightly different form, shaped by the need to observe rather than adjust. A pause may last a moment longer as they look across a row, taking in the arrangement without touching it. A small shift in position allows them to view a stack from another angle, noticing details that are not visible from a single place. Occasionally, an item is adjusted very slightly, not to change its position, but to ensure it rests as intended. These movements are minimal, yet they contribute to the ongoing care of the space. For those who carry out these routines, there is a quiet sense of connection to the patterns they follow. The paths, the pauses, and the small actions all become part of an internal rhythm that guides their movement. This rhythm does not need to be explained, as it is learned through repetition and presence. In this way, their role is not defined by what they change, but by what they notice, allowing the order of the storage room to continue with quiet consistency. In certain moments, the watchers pause beside specific items, giving their attention to details that are not immediately visible from a distance. A hand may rest briefly on the surface of a sack, feeling the distribution of what lies within rather than examining it with the eye. Near a row of jars, one might lean slightly closer, observing the alignment of lids or the subtle differences between them. These pauses are not uniform, but shaped by the quiet sense that something requires a closer presence. The space allows for these moments, offering time for attention to settle without interruption. To remain near these pauses is to notice how the atmosphere gathers more closely around the act of observation. The air feels slightly more focused, as if the surrounding space narrows gently toward the point of attention. The sound of movement diminishes, not through silence, but through a reduction of activity that allows small details to become more apparent. Even the faintest contact, such as a hand brushing against a surface, carries a clearer presence in these moments. This creates a subtle shift in the sensory experience, where observation becomes part of the environment. As these moments of attention pass, the watchers return to their steady movement, carrying with them what has been quietly noted. There is no visible record of what has been observed, yet it shapes the next steps in their routine. A path may be adjusted slightly to revisit a particular area later, or a pause may be extended the next time they pass through. These small changes do not alter the overall flow, but they refine it, allowing the process of observation to remain responsive rather than fixed. For those who carry this awareness, the act of noticing becomes an ongoing process that blends into their presence within the room. It is not separate from movement or routine, but part of how each step is taken and each space is understood. Over time, this creates a quiet connection between the watcher and the environment, where attention is guided by familiarity rather than effort. In this way, the storage room is not only observed, but experienced through a continuous, gentle awareness. At certain times of the day, their presence becomes more visible through small interactions with one another, though these exchanges remain quiet and brief. One watcher may pause near another, not stopping the flow of movement but adjusting it slightly, allowing a moment of shared attention toward a particular section. Their positions shift subtly to make space, avoiding overlap while maintaining the continuity of their paths. There are no formal gatherings, only passing alignments where their routes cross, creating brief points of connection within the larger pattern of motion. To stand near these moments is to notice how sound and presence adjust in response to more than one individual occupying the same space. The air carries a slightly fuller tone, shaped by the combined movement of steps and the quiet exchange of breath. A low voice may pass between them, not rising above the general atmosphere, but blending into it as another layer. The texture of sound becomes more complex for a short time, then softens again as their paths separate. These sensory changes are gentle, unfolding without disrupting the calm of the room. As they continue their routines, these brief interactions influence how the space is attended to without creating any visible shift in structure. One watcher may move slightly ahead, allowing another to follow a different path, redistributing attention across the room. A pause taken by one may lead to a later pause by another, creating a subtle sequence that extends beyond the immediate moment. These adjustments are not planned, but arise naturally from the shared presence within the space, shaping the flow of observation in quiet ways. For those involved in this work, there is an unspoken understanding that extends between them, allowing their movements to align without instruction. This shared awareness forms a quiet connection, where each individual contributes to the overall care of the room without needing to direct or be directed. In this way, the watchers become part of a collective presence, maintaining the balance of observation through cooperation that is felt rather than expressed. At times, their routine unfolds across longer stretches of the day, where the act of watching becomes tied to the gradual passage of time within the storage rooms. They return to the same areas at different intervals, not out of habit alone, but to notice how things have shifted between visits. A stack that appeared firm earlier may now settle slightly, or the scent near a row of jars may deepen in a way that suggests quiet change. These repeated visits form a pattern that stretches across hours, connecting one moment of observation to another without urgency. To experience this pattern is to notice how time shapes the atmosphere as much as the physical space does. The air feels subtly different as the day moves forward, sometimes warmer, sometimes cooler, carrying faint changes that reflect what has occurred above ground. Light that enters through small openings shifts its angle, creating new outlines across surfaces that were previously less defined. The watchers move through these changes without drawing attention to them, yet their presence seems to align with the slow rhythm of the day. As their rounds continue, the accumulation of these small observations begins to form a quiet understanding of progression. They do not record each detail in a visible way, but carry an internal sense of how the room evolves over time. A slight adjustment in one area may be followed by a longer pause later, as if responding to something that has been building gradually. These actions do not interrupt the flow, but add depth to it, allowing the process of watching to extend beyond single moments. For those who live within this rhythm, there is a sense that time itself becomes part of their role. The act of watching is not limited to what is present in front of them, but includes an awareness of what has been and what may follow. This creates a quiet continuity between past and present, where each observation is connected to those that came before. In this way, their presence becomes a thread that moves through time, holding together the slow changes within the storage space. In the quieter hours, when fewer movements pass through the storage rooms, the watchers remain present in a more subtle way, their routine continuing without the support of surrounding activity. The paths they follow appear more open, with wider spaces between moments of movement. They move at a pace shaped by attention rather than necessity, allowing each step to settle fully before the next begins. The arrangement of the room becomes more visible during these times, as fewer interruptions draw the eye away from its structure, and the watchers move within it as quiet extensions of its order. To remain in the room during these hours is to notice how the atmosphere deepens, shaped by the reduced presence of activity. The air carries a softer tone, with fewer sounds to interrupt its quiet layering. Footsteps become more distinct, not louder, but more clearly placed within the space. The faint sense of stored goods feel more evenly spread, no longer shifting with frequent movement. The watchers contribute to this atmosphere, their presence adding a gentle rhythm that aligns with the slower pace of the room. As their routine continues in this quieter setting, their actions take on a slightly different quality. Pauses may last longer, allowing more time for observation without the need to move onward quickly. A single path may be followed more slowly, with attention given to areas that might be passed more quickly during busier times. The sequence of their movement adjusts naturally, shaped by the absence of interruption rather than by deliberate choice. These changes remain subtle, forming a variation within the same overall pattern. For those who experience this part of the day, there is a quiet recognition that watching is not tied to activity alone, but to presence itself. The absence of movement around them does not lessen their role, but instead reveals another layer of it, where attention becomes more focused and continuous. In this way, the watchers maintain their connection to the space regardless of external rhythm, holding a steady awareness that supports the order of the room through both busy and quiet moments. Within the storage rooms, the structure of the space offers few clear signs of passing hours, yet subtle indicators remain for those who look closely. Light enters only in narrow traces through small openings, forming soft lines that move slowly across stone and stacked goods. Shadows stretch and shift in response, not sharply, but in gradual adjustments that are easy to overlook. The arrangement of barrels, sacks, and jars provides a steady reference, allowing even the smallest changes in light and position to become noticeable when compared over longer stretches of observation. To spend time within this environment is to experience a quiet transformation of the senses, where attention turns toward details that might otherwise remain unnoticed. The air carries a layered presence that deepens slightly as time moves forward, with scents becoming more blended and less distinct. The coolness of the room feels consistent at first, yet over time, subtle variations can be felt, influenced by the slow movement of air through unseen openings. Even the texture of the ground underfoot seems to shift in perception, as familiarity allows smaller differences to emerge more clearly. Across hours and days, the contents of the room begin to reflect the influence of time through gradual, quiet changes. Surfaces of stored goods adjust in tone and texture, not suddenly, but through a steady progression that reveals itself only through comparison. A sack may feel slightly firmer than before, or the scent near a group of jars may carry a deeper note. These changes do not draw attention to themselves, but accumulate gently, forming a continuous process that unfolds without interruption. For those who remain aware within this space, time becomes something that is sensed rather than measured. There is no need to count hours, as the environment itself provides subtle cues that mark its passage. This creates a different kind of understanding, where change is not defined by moments, but by the gradual transformation of what is held within the room. In this way, time becomes part of the storage process itself, shaping both the contents and the experience of the space. Along the surfaces of the stored goods, small visual details begin to reveal how time settles into material. The edges of stacked sacks soften slightly, their outlines less sharp where fabric has adjusted under its own weight. Barrels show faint changes in tone along their sides, where contact with air and surrounding objects leaves subtle variations. Clay jars carry a muted surface that reflects less light than before, as their outer layer responds gradually to the environment. These changes are not immediate, yet they form a quiet record across the objects themselves. To observe these details closely is to notice how perception begins to shift with familiarity. The eye becomes more attentive to differences that were once too slight to register, allowing patterns to emerge slowly over repeated viewing. The air seems to carry a deeper presence near certain items, where scent has gathered and matured through time. The sense of touch also becomes more refined, with surfaces feeling slightly altered in ways that are difficult to describe but easy to recognize. These sensory impressions build gradually, forming an awareness shaped by continued presence. As time continues to pass, the relationship between objects and space begins to evolve in small but meaningful ways. The arrangement of goods may appear unchanged at a glance, yet closer observation reveals minor shifts where materials have settled or adjusted. A stack may lean ever so slightly in a new direction, or the spacing between items may alter as weight redistributes. These changes do not disrupt the overall order, but they introduce a quiet movement within the stillness, reflecting the influence of time on physical structure. For those who spend long periods within these rooms, there is a growing sense that time is not separate from the objects it touches. It becomes part of their form, shaping them gradually without the need for visible action. This understanding creates a quiet connection between observer and environment, where noticing becomes an act of following these slow transformations. In this way, time is experienced not as something passing through the room, but as something gently working within it. In certain areas of the storage room, the passage of time becomes visible through the quiet behavior of surfaces that interact with air and moisture. The stone walls develop faint variations where contact with the environment leaves subtle traces, forming darker or lighter patches that shift slowly over long periods. Wooden elements, such as shelves or supports, begin to show a deeper tone, their surfaces responding to the surrounding air in ways that build gradually. Even the floor carries slight differences where repeated contact has smoothed some areas while leaving others more textured. These details create a quiet layer of change within the structure itself. To remain near these surfaces is to notice how the senses adjust to their presence over time. The air near the walls carries a slightly different quality, influenced by the materials that shape it, creating a sense of depth that is felt rather than seen. The scent becomes more subtle and blended, with no single element standing apart, forming a background that feels continuous. The texture of surfaces, when touched, reveals differences that are not immediately obvious, requiring a slower, more attentive awareness to fully perceive. These sensory experiences deepen with time spent in the space. As these surfaces continue to interact with their surroundings, small changes accumulate in ways that reflect the steady influence of time. A section of wall may show a slightly altered tone where air has moved differently, or a wooden beam may appear darker where it has absorbed more of the environment. These changes are not uniform, but vary across the space, creating a pattern that is shaped by subtle differences in conditions. The progression is gradual, forming a quiet transformation that unfolds without interruption. For those who become familiar with these changes, there is an understanding that extends beyond the objects stored within the room. The space itself becomes part of the process, holding time within its surfaces and materials. This creates a sense that the environment is not separate from what it contains, but actively participates in the slow unfolding of change. In this way, the passage of time is not only seen in the stored goods, but in the very structure that surrounds them. Within the quieter intervals of the day, when activity slows and the storage rooms settle into a softer rhythm, time expresses itself through the gradual transition between light and shadow. The faint lines of illumination that enter from above shift their position across the floor and along the sides of containers, creating new outlines that were not present before. These changes are not sudden, but unfold with a gentle continuity, allowing shapes to appear and recede in a slow sequence. The movement of light does not alter the arrangement of the room, yet it changes how each object is perceived. To experience this transition is to notice how the senses respond to these subtle shifts in illumination. The contrast between light and shadow creates a quiet variation in how surfaces are seen, revealing textures in one moment and softening them in another. The air feels slightly different where light reaches, carrying a faint warmth that is absent in shaded areas. Even the perception of space adjusts, as certain areas feel more open when illuminated and more enclosed when shadow settles over them. These sensory differences create a gentle rhythm within the environment. As the day continues, these shifts in light guide small changes in how the room is experienced without altering its structure. The same objects appear in new ways as shadows move across them, highlighting different aspects of their form. A barrel may seem more defined when light touches its edge, while a sack may blend more fully into the surrounding space as shadow deepens. These changes do not require any movement of the objects themselves, yet they create a sense of progression that reflects the passage of time. For those who remain within the room across these transitions, there is a quiet awareness of how perception evolves alongside the environment. Time becomes something that is felt through these changes in light and shadow, rather than measured by external markers. This creates a sense of continuity, where each moment connects to the next through gradual transformation. In this way, the passage of time is experienced as a shifting relationship between the space and those who observe it. In certain moments, the passage of time becomes most noticeable not through what appears, but through what gradually fades from immediate awareness. The edges of objects lose their sharpness in perception as familiarity deepens, allowing attention to settle more evenly across the room. Details that once stood out begin to blend into a broader sense of space, forming a quieter, more continuous experience. The arrangement remains present, yet it no longer demands the same level of focus, creating a subtle shift in how the environment is held within the mind. To experience this fading of emphasis is to notice how the senses adapt over extended presence. The scent of stored goods becomes less distinct as individual notes merge into a single, balanced impression. The feel of the air, once clearly cool or dry, becomes something that is simply accepted rather than examined. Even sound changes in perception, with quieter tones becoming part of a steady background rather than separate events. These sensory adjustments do not remove detail, but soften its prominence, allowing the experience of the room to become more unified. As this process continues, the relationship between observer and space shifts in quiet ways. Movement through the room becomes more fluid, guided less by active observation and more by familiarity with its structure. Small changes that occur within the space are still present, yet they are noticed differently, often recognized only when they contrast with an established sense of how things have been. This creates a form of awareness that is less immediate but more connected to the passage of time itself. For those who remain within this environment over long periods, there is a growing understanding that time shapes not only the objects in space, but also the way they are perceived. The act of noticing becomes less about identifying each detail and more about sensing the overall presence of the room. In this way, time influences both the environment and the experience of it, creating a quiet balance between what is observed and how it is felt. At the far end of longer intervals, when days have folded into one another without clear separation, the passage of time begins to appear through comparison rather than direct observation. A row of barrels that once felt newly arranged now carries a quieter weight, as if its presence has settled more deeply into the room. Sacks that were once firm in their shape take on a gentler contour, adjusting to the steady pressure of their contents. Clay jars seem to hold their place with a different quality, not changed in form, but in the way they belong within the space after extended presence. To notice these differences is to experience time as something that gathers rather than passes. The air feels more layered, carrying traces that have accumulated gradually, forming a depth that was not immediately present before. Scents that once stood apart now feel more integrated, creating a softer and more continuous atmosphere. The sensation of the room becomes less about individual elements and more about the way they combine, offering a sense of duration that is felt through the whole environment rather than through any single detail. As this accumulation continues, the space begins to reflect a deeper rhythm that extends beyond daily changes. The arrangement holds its structure, yet it carries the subtle influence of time within its surfaces and forms. Small shifts that occurred earlier are no longer distinct events, but part of a broader pattern that has developed over extended periods. This creates a quiet continuity where past changes blend into present conditions, forming a layered sense of progression that unfolds without interruption. For those who remain aware within this extended passage, there is a quiet recognition that time is not something that moves through the space, but something that settles into it. The storage room becomes a place where duration is held and experienced in a gradual and continuous way. This understanding does not require measurement, but emerges through sustained presence, where the accumulation of moments forms a deeper connection between space, objects, and perception. In certain parts of the storage room, small openings in the arrangement begin to appear where items are selected and brought forward. A row of sacks shows a slight interruption where one has been removed, leaving a space that reveals the depth behind it. Barrels that once formed an unbroken line now include a gap, creating a subtle change in the structure of the wall they formed. Clay jars are lifted from their clusters, their absence creating new shapes within the corners where they once stood. These changes are not widespread, but they introduce small variations within the overall order of the space. To be present during these moments is to notice how the atmosphere shifts as items are moved from their resting places. The air carries a slightly sharper presence near the point of retrieval, as surfaces that were enclosed are briefly exposed. A faint release of scent may rise as a sack is opened or a jar is uncovered, adding a new layer to the surrounding space. The sound of movement becomes more defined, not louder, but more focused, as hands interact with objects that have remained untouched for some time. These sensory details create a quiet contrast with the earlier stillness. The act of retrieval unfolds through a series of careful motions that respect the arrangement already in place. A sack is lifted slowly, its weight adjusted as it is brought away from the stack. A barrel is rolled with measured control, guided along a path that avoids disturbing those beside it. A jar is raised with both hands, its position shifted gently to prevent contact with surrounding surfaces. These actions are deliberate, each one allowing the object to move from its place without disrupting the broader structure of the room. For those who carry out these tasks, there is a quiet awareness of transition that accompanies each movement. The item being retrieved is no longer part of the still arrangement, but not yet fully part of use. This moment exists between two states, where the object carries both the presence of storage and the anticipation of its purpose beyond the room. In this way, retrieval becomes more than a simple action. It becomes a passage that connects what has been kept with what will soon be needed. As items move away from their original positions, they pass through the narrow pathways that were once shaped only for quiet observation. These routes now carry a different purpose, guiding objects outward rather than simply allowing movement between them. The space adjusts to this change, with gaps opening slightly as items are carried through, creating temporary expansions within the arrangement. Corners that once held tightly grouped jars now show brief openness, while stacked layers reveal their inner structure as one piece is taken from them. The physical layout remains intact, yet it momentarily reveals its hidden depth. To follow this movement is to notice how the sensory quality of the space shifts along these paths. The air feels more active around the moving object, carrying with it a faint trace of what has been lifted or uncovered. The scent becomes more defined for a moment, then softens again as distance increases. The sound of footsteps and contact becomes more pronounced along the route, forming a quiet sequence that traces the journey outward. These sensory changes are brief, yet they mark the transition from rest to movement in a subtle but noticeable way. As the item continues along its path, the actions surrounding it unfold with quiet coordination. Hands adjust their grip to maintain balance, shifting slightly as the object changes position in relation to the body. The pace of movement remains steady, neither rushed nor slowed beyond necessity, allowing each step to follow naturally from the last. When passing near other stored goods, care is taken to maintain distance, preserving the arrangement that remains behind. These actions create a smooth flow, where movement and structure coexist without interruption. For those involved in this process, there is an understanding that extends beyond the immediate task of carrying. The path itself becomes part of the experience, connecting the place of storage with the space where use will occur. This connection is not marked by visible boundaries, but by the gradual shift in how the object is held and perceived. In this way, the act of moving an item outward becomes a continuation of its presence, linking the quiet order of storage with the unfolding activity beyond it. Near the points where items are prepared before leaving the storage space, there are small areas where objects are briefly set down and adjusted. These places are not marked, yet they are recognized through repeated use, often located where pathways widen slightly or where surfaces allow for temporary placement. A sack may rest against a low ledge, a jar placed carefully on a flat stone, or a bundle set down to be retied. These areas serve as quiet transitions within the room, where movement pauses just long enough for the next step to be prepared. To remain near these moments is to notice how the atmosphere gathers around the act of preparation. The air carries a slightly fuller presence, shaped by the brief exposure of contents and the handling of objects that have been enclosed. The scent becomes more noticeable here, rising gently before settling again as items are secured. The sound of touch is clearer with fabric tightening, lids being adjusted, or surfaces meeting softly. These sensory details do not linger, but they create a distinct layer within the process of movement. As preparation unfolds, a series of small actions takes place that shapes how each item continues its journey. A knot is retied with steady hands, ensuring that a sack holds its contents securely. A jar is checked and its lid pressed into place, confirming its closure before being lifted again. A bundle is shifted slightly to balance its weight more evenly. These actions are brief, yet they form an essential part of the transition, allowing the movement outward to continue without interruption. For those who perform these tasks, there is a quiet awareness of the importance of this moment between movement and departure. It is a space where attention is focused not on where the item has been, but on how it will continue forward. This creates a sense of care that is carried through each action, shaping the way objects leave the storage room. In this way, preparation becomes a quiet bridge between rest and use, holding a brief but meaningful place within the larger process. As items approach the outer edges of the storage rooms, the physical space begins to shift in subtle ways that signal a nearing transition. The pathways widen slightly, allowing for easier passage as objects are carried toward the next stage. Light becomes more present here, entering in broader traces that fall across the surfaces of what is being moved. The arrangement of stored goods thins out near these points, creating clearer routes that guide movement outward. The structure of the room begins to open, not abruptly, but through a gradual change in spacing and illumination. To move through this area is to notice how the sensory experience begins to change alongside the environment. The air feels lighter, touched by a faint movement that carries a hint of the outside. The scent of stored goods becomes less concentrated, blending with a fresher presence that enters from beyond. The sound of footsteps and carried objects takes on a slightly sharper quality, as it is no longer fully absorbed by tightly arranged surroundings. These sensory shifts create a gentle sense of movement towards something beyond the enclosed space. As objects pass through this transitional area, the rhythm of movement begins to adjust. Steps may become slightly more deliberate as light increases, allowing for clearer visibility of the path ahead. Hands maintain their careful hold, yet there is a subtle change in posture as the object is prepared to leave the controlled environment of storage. The pace remains steady, but carries a quiet anticipation, shaped by the nearing transition. These changes are small, yet they mark a shift in the nature of the movement itself. For those who carry items through this space, there is an awareness that they are approaching a boundary between two different environments. The storage room, with its enclosed order, gives way to a space where use will take place. This awareness does not interrupt the process, but accompanies it, adding a quiet sense of direction to each step. In this way, the transition becomes part of the experience, linking the stillness of storage with the activity that lies ahead. At the threshold where the storage room gives way to more active areas, there is often a brief moment when the carried item is paused once more before continuing outward. This space is shaped by the meeting of two environments, where the enclosed order of storage begins to open into wider movement. The surfaces here show signs of repeated passage, slightly worn where objects have been set down or shifted before being taken further. The arrangement is less fixed, allowing for a temporary gathering of items that are in transition, neither fully stored nor fully in use. To remain within this threshold is to notice how the atmosphere carries a blend of two different qualities. The deeper scent of stored goods lingers close to the ground, while a lighter, fresher presence enters from beyond, creating a gentle contrast in the air. The sound of movement becomes more layered, as quieter steps from within the storage room meet the more varied sounds of activity outside. The light feels broader here, softening the edges of objects while revealing their forms more clearly. These sensory elements overlap, forming a space that feels balanced between two states. As objects pause within this area, small adjustments take place that prepare them for what comes next. A sack may be lifted and repositioned onto a shoulder, shifting its weight for easier carrying over longer distances. A jar might be transferred from one set of hands to another, changing the way it is held as it moves into a different setting. These actions are not hurried, but they carry a sense of readiness, marking the final steps before the item leaves the storage space entirely. Each movement is part of a quiet continuation. For those who stand at this threshold, there is a clear but unspoken understanding that this is a point of change. The object being carried has completed its time within storage and is now entering a new phase of use. This awareness shapes the way it is handled, with a balance of care and purpose guiding each action. In this way, the threshold becomes more than a physical space. It becomes a moment where the roles of preservation and use gently meet and pass into one another. Beyond the threshold, as items leave the storage rooms behind, their movement begins to settle into a different rhythm shaped by open space and changing purpose. The narrow paths give way to wider passages, and the close arrangement of stored goods is replaced by a more varied environment. The objects themselves appear different in this new setting, not because their form has changed, but because they are no longer surrounded by the same structure. Their presence becomes more defined against the broader space, carrying with them the quiet imprint of where they have been. To follow this transition is to notice how the sensory experience shifts as the environment opens outward. The air feels less enclosed, allowing sense to disperse more freely rather than gathering in one place. The sound of movement becomes more expansive, no longer softened by tightly arranged surroundings, but carried further into the space. Light reaches more fully across the surfaces of the objects, revealing textures that were previously subdued. These changes create a sense of release, where the qualities of the storage room gradually give way to a different atmosphere. As the movement continues, the actions surrounding the objects begin to adapt to their new context. The careful, measured pace of retrieval remains, yet it adjusts slightly to accommodate longer distances and more open paths. Hands shift their hold to maintain comfort over time, and the path forward becomes less confined, allowing for a steadier flow of motion. These adjustments are not abrupt, but unfold naturally as the environment changes, guiding the transition from storage to use in a quiet and continuous way. For those who carry these items forward, there is a subtle awareness that the journey has reached a new stage. The object is no longer part of the ordered stillness of the storage room, but part of an unfolding activity that extends beyond it. This shift does not erase what has come before, but builds upon it, carrying the quiet care of storage into the next phase. In this way, the act of retrieval becomes a gentle passage, linking the calm of preservation with the movement of use. Within the storage rooms, there are areas where the arrangement begins to open, revealing sections of floor and wall that were once hidden behind layers of stored goods. A row that once held tightly packed sacks now shows gaps where individual pieces have been removed over time. Barrels that formed a continuous line are now spaced apart, their presence interrupted by empty stretches that expose the stone behind them. Corners that held clusters of jars begin to clear, leaving behind only a few remaining objects. These physical changes create a different structure within the room, one shaped by gradual reduction. To be present in these spaces is to notice how the atmosphere shifts as fullness gives way to openness. The air feels lighter where fewer objects remain, allowing it to move more freely through the space. Scents that were once concentrated begin to soften, dispersing across a wider area rather than gathering in one place. Sound also changes, carrying slightly further where there are fewer surfaces to absorb it. These sensory differences are gentle, yet they create a distinct experience that reflects the changing state of the room. As time continues, the process of emptying unfolds through a series of quiet actions that extend over long periods. Items are taken away one by one, each removal creating a small adjustment within the arrangement. The structure does not collapse or shift suddenly, but adapts gradually, maintaining its balance even as it becomes less dense. Eventually, new items begin to arrive, filling the spaces that have opened, restoring the arrangement in a different form. This cycle of removal and return shapes the room continuously. For those who observe this process, there is a quiet understanding that storage is not a fixed condition, but part of an ongoing rhythm. The movement between fullness and emptiness does not feel abrupt, but flows naturally from one state to another. Each phase carries its own presence, contributing to a larger pattern that unfolds over time. In this way, the storage room becomes a place of quiet cycles, where change is constant yet never hurried. Along the walls where rows once stood uninterrupted, the pattern of spacing begins to reveal a quieter structure beneath what had been filled. The stone surfaces, long hidden behind stacked goods, come into view in uneven intervals, showing slight variations in tone where objects once rested against them. The floor carries faint impressions where weight had been held for extended periods, shallow marks that outline former placements. These traces do not form a clear record, yet they suggest where things once stood, allowing the room to hold a subtle memory of its previous fullness. To move through these partially cleared spaces is to notice how the sensory experience shifts in a more open arrangement. The air feels less layered, with fewer materials shaping how it circulates, creating a softer and more even presence. Scents that were once concentrated near dense groupings now feel more diffuse, spreading gently across the room. The sound of movement carries with a slightly different quality, traveling further before settling. These changes are not abrupt, but unfold gradually as the density of stored goods decreases. As new items begin to enter the room over time, their placement introduces another stage within the cycle. A sack may be set down where an empty space has remained, beginning the quiet process of rebuilding the arrangement. A barrel might be rolled into position, aligning with others to form the start of a new row. These additions do not immediately restore the previous structure, but gradually reshape the space, filling it in layers that reflect the timing of arrival. The room begins to take on a different pattern, shaped by what is returned rather than what was once there. For those who observe this stage, there is a quiet awareness that the room is never fully defined by a single state. The presence of emptiness and fullness exists together, each influencing how the other is perceived. This creates a sense of continuity that extends beyond individual moments, allowing the cycle to be understood as an ongoing process rather than a sequence with a clear beginning or end. In this way, the storage space reflects a rhythm that moves gently between absence and presence. In the middle sections of the room, where change unfolds more gradually, the cycle reveals itself through uneven patterns of return. Some rows begin to fill again while others remain partially open, creating a layered arrangement where past removal and new placement exist side by side. A stack may appear complete in one corner, while nearby spaces still hold traces of absence, forming a quiet contrast between different stages of use. The structure does not rebuild in a single motion, but through scattered additions that slowly connect, forming a new configuration shaped by timing rather than design. To stand within this shifting arrangement is to notice how the atmosphere carries both lightness and density at once. Areas that have refilled begin to hold scent more closely again, while open spaces allow it to disperse, creating a subtle variation from one step to the next. The air feels uneven in its movement, guided by where objects gather and where they have yet to return. Sound behaves in a similar way, sometimes softened by nearby stacks, sometimes traveling further through clearer paths. These sensory differences reflect the layered state of the room. As items continue to arrive and others are still taken away, the rhythm of the cycle becomes more complex. A newly placed sack may rest beside an area that is gradually clearing, marking two directions of change occurring at once. Barrels are aligned into fresh rows while older groupings thin out, creating a quiet interplay between formation and reduction. These movements do not conflict, but unfold together, shaping a space that is constantly adjusting through overlapping processes. The room becomes a place where different moments exist at the same time. For those who observe this stage, there is a growing sense that the cycle is not a simple return to what once was. Each phase carries its own arrangement, influenced by what has come before but not bound to it. This creates a quiet understanding that repetition does not mean sameness, but rather a continuation that takes on new forms. In this way, the storage room holds a rhythm that evolves gently, allowing each cycle to bring a slightly different presence into the space. At certain points within the cycle, there are brief intervals when movement slows, and the arrangement of the room settles into a temporary balance between what has been removed and what has returned. In these moments, the structure appears neither full nor empty, but held in a quiet middle state where both conditions are present in equal measure. Rows are partially formed, stacks rise to moderate heights, and open spaces remain between them. The room carries a sense of transition that is not incomplete, but simply part of an ongoing process that has paused for a time. To remain within this balanced state is to notice how the atmosphere feels more evenly distributed across the space. The air carries neither the density of full storage nor the openness of near emptiness, but a blend that rests somewhere between. Scents are present but not concentrated, forming a gentle background that does not draw attention. Sound travels with a soft clarity, shaped by both the presence of objects and the spaces between them. These sensory qualities create a calm environment that reflects the temporary balance of the room. As time continues, this equilibrium begins to shift again, guided by the gradual continuation of the cycle. New items arrive and extend existing rows, or removed items create fresh openings that alter the arrangement once more. These changes do not disrupt the sense of balance immediately, but gently move it in one direction or another. The room adjusts through these small shifts, maintaining its structure while allowing the cycle to progress. Each action contributes to a slow transformation that unfolds without interruption. For those who observe this stage, there is a quiet recognition that balance itself is not a fixed point, but a passing moment within a larger rhythm. The sense of stability felt here is temporary, shaped by the alignment of presence and absence at a particular time. This understanding adds depth to the experience of the cycle, revealing that even moments of stillness are part of continuous movement. In this way, the storage room holds a calm awareness of change, where balance is both real and fleeting. As the cycle continues, there are moments when the room begins to feel fuller again, though not in the same pattern it once held. New rows extend in slightly different directions, shaped by the timing and type of what arrives. Stacks rise with subtle variations in height, reflecting the sequence of placement rather than any fixed plan. Corners that were once open begin to gather items again, though their arrangement carries a different balance than before. The room does not return to a previous state, but forms a new version of fullness that grows quietly from what has been added. To stand within this returning density is to notice how the atmosphere gradually becomes more layered once again. The air begins to carry scents with greater presence, gathering around clusters of stored goods and settling into the spaces between them. Sound softens as surfaces absorb more of its movement, creating a quieter and more contained environment. The sense of space shifts, feeling more enclosed as objects fill the room, though not in exactly the same way as before. These sensory changes unfold gently, shaping the experience of the space over time. As placement continues, the structure of the room becomes more defined through repeated actions that build upon one another. A row extends as new items align with those already in place, forming a longer continuous line. A stack rises layer by layer, each addition adjusting the balance of what supports it. These actions do not happen all at once, but accumulate through steady repetition, allowing the room to regain a sense of structure that feels familiar yet newly formed. The process reflects both continuity and variation within the cycle. For those who observe this stage, there is a quiet awareness that fullness carries its own sense of renewal. It is not simply a return to what was, but an expression of the cycle moving forward. The arrangement holds traces of earlier phases, yet it stands as its own moment within the ongoing rhythm. In this way, The storage room becomes a place where each stage of the cycle contributes to a larger sense of continuity, shaped by both memory and change. As the cycle continues, there are moments when the room begins to feel fuller again, though not in the same pattern it once held. New rows extend in slightly different directions, shaped by the timing and type of what arrives. Stacks rise with subtle variations in height, reflecting the sequence of placement rather than any fixed plan. Corners that were once open begin to gather items again, though their arrangement carries a different balance than before. The room does not return to a previous state, but forms a new version of fullness that grows quietly from what has been added. To stand within this returning density is to notice how the atmosphere gradually becomes more layered once again. The air begins to carry sense with greater presence, gathering around clusters of stored goods and settling into the spaces between them. Sound softens as surfaces absorb more of its movement, creating a quieter and more contained environment. The sense of space shifts, feeling more enclosed as objects fill the room, though not in exactly the same way as before. These sensory changes unfold gently, shaping the experience of the space over time. As placement continues, the structure of the room becomes more defined through repeated actions that build upon one another. A row extends as new items align with those already in place, forming a longer continuous line. A stack rises layer by layer, each addition adjusting the balance of what supports it. These actions do not happen all at once, but accumulate through steady repetition, allowing the room to regain a sense of structure that feels familiar yet newly formed. The process reflects both continuity and variation within the cycle. For those who observe this stage, there is a quiet awareness that fullness carries its own sense of renewal. It is not simply a return to what was, but an expression of the cycle moving forward. The arrangement holds traces of earlier phases, yet it stands as its own moment within the ongoing rhythm. In this way, the storage room becomes a place where each stage of the cycle contributes to a larger sense of continuity, shaped by both memory and change.